Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Elena Rios. I'm president of the National Hispanic Health Foundation and also the president CEO of the National Hispanic Medical Association. Tonight, we're very honored to be supported by Amgen to give you I'll say the nuts and bolts about clinical research. And today's discussion will be about patient recruitment and retention. We're very honored to have with us a great speaker from Iowa, who I will introduce in a moment. But let me just say that we're very focused on the efforts to increase diversity in clinical trials and diversity in clinical research. That means we really need to educate more of our networks, whether you're doctors or nurses, students, to learn about from experts their challenges, but also their strategies. So today we're going to be talking about, again, recruitment and retention of Latinos in our communities. And as you know, Latinos are now 19% of the whole population. And in the next 10 years or so, we will be 1 out of 4 Americans living in this country. And not only that, but Spanish language is the #2 language after English in this country. So there's a lot of need to learn how to talk to and how to encourage Latino people, whether they're in the system or not in healthcare system, to get involved in health and to understand how to better live their lives. And in this case, we want them to learn about how to connect with our research community so that they can create knowledge through research for the next generation. So all of our, children and grandchildren of the Latinos in this country can live even better. So that's our real main purpose for today. Next slide. So we have some housekeeping. We'd like to keep all your microphones on mute. We would like you to ask questions as we go through the conversation and some slides. We would like you to put those questions in the Q&A box so that we can have the staff contact each other through the chat box. We will have a post-webinar survey that will be emailed out after the event, and we'll have a QR code at the end if you'd like to just answer the survey at the end tonight. And we have a recording that is being housed on our NHHF website, which is nhmafoundation.org. And it will be up, the recording will be up about a week after the event. We are also live on Facebook. Next slide. And we have CME accreditation for the physicians and other health professionals. The pharmacy and the pharmacists and nurses can also get continuing education. And that again will be available on our website. So I think we're just going to start with the conversation, unless, is there another slide that you have, Candace? Oh, the objectives. The objectives really are to describe how our Latino physicians that are involved in research, whether they're an academic or private practice, we have a quarterly webinar series. In this case, Dr. Correa is in academics, but we have experts who have actually developed successful clinical research with targeted recruitment and retention strategies for Latino patients. We also are reviewing clinical research principles and increasing awareness about our organization, the National Hispanic Health Foundation, which has a National Center for Hispanic Health Research, so that we can have a network of more Latino physicians and Latino-serving physicians, because there's not that many of us, right? We really want to be able to have, in the future, we are building a mentoring program so that the senior researchers can help junior researchers, whether you're in residence or medical students, to get involved in research. And I think that's the last slide. Okay, so we're going to stop there. Let's open up our conversation, and we're going to start. Let me just introduce Dr. Correa. Dr. Marcelo Correa is a clinical assistant professor of internal medicine and endocrinology and metabolism at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, Iowa. He graduated from the State University of Rio de Janeiro Medical School in Brazil and holds a PhD degree in translational biomedicine from the University of Iowa. His major clinical interests have been in bariatric medicine, practiced at the University of Iowa Weight Management Clinic and the VA MOVE program. He's also an investigator at the University of Iowa Diabetes Research Center, where he studies the role of ER stress in the setting of skeletal muscle specific knockdown. And you can tell us more about that, Dr. Correa. He also conducts clinical trials on obesity, diabetes, dyslipidemia at the Preventive Intervention Center at University of Iowa, with a particular focus on liver disease. And I think that, and we all know that Hispanics have a genetic predisposition for the fatty liver disease that he is an expert in research on. So Dr. Correa, welcome. And let me just ask you, what do you think are some of the major challenges that you've seen with recruiting Latinos into your clinical trials? All these, from diabetes to obesity. I mean, you must see a lot of Latinos.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Rios, thank you very much for the nice introduction and for the invitation. Again, I'm very honored to be here talking about something I have passion for. So the question is, what are the challenges? In Iowa, we don't have like a very large Latino and Hispanic population. And for me in particular, it's very challenging to recruit these participants. Again, a lot has to do with geography, but even though in general, the population here does not have a lot of Latinos and Hispanics, there are certain places in Iowa where you can definitely find this population. So depending on the geographical part of the country you are at, it's very important to define these places where people tend to develop communities, because again, that's how typically society is organized in the United States. We have certain communities that hang out together in geographical places. And of course, that's the most obvious place to go and advertise. All right, so reaching this population is very important. Now, why do we need to do this? Right? Why do we need to recruit this Hispanics and Asian, African Americans, you name it? Why this is important? So I'm just kind of maybe rolling back a little bit the question. It's very important because in such heterogeneous population like in the United States, in many other places, who the population is big, the effectiveness in responses to intervention treatments can be very different. So it's important to have a heterogeneous population in the clinical trials to assess these differences. Again, clinical trials typically they target a certain outcome. They give you like a general direction of the intervention in terms of the outcome. And again, depending on how the population or the participants in the clinical trial are distributed in the trial, you can definitely do secondary analyses to identify certain differences, which sometimes are hypothesis generating and sometimes can lead to other studies in a particular population. So it's very important to have diversity for that reason. The fact that you don't have clinical trials with diverse enough population of participants can actually lead to like health inequalities, which is a very, very important topic in our days. So having this, richness of participants is very important. Another thing that is critical, specifically if you look from the perspective of the research center, is the fact, if your center, in my case, what we call PIC, all right, the Preventative Intervention Center at University of Iowa, if we can add diversity to our to the participants in the diverse clinical trials we have, it becomes very attractive for the sponsor to work with us. So there's a practical message there as well. So if you do research, you want to bring those clinical trials to you, and again, it's important to add diversity because you become more attractive. So there is like a scientific part of it, but even, you guys are starting doing this as part of your professional life, you want to be in a place where the clinical trials are attractive. You want to make your place attractive. So adding diversity is a very, very important aspect of this, professional path.
Thank you, Dr. Correa. We are now joined by Dr. Arguelles. I'm going to introduce her also. Julieta Arguelles is a doctor at the MD Anderson Center, and has been very involved with oncology clinical trials. Dr. Arguelles also has founded an organization for Latino IMGs, which are international medical graduates. And I have to say that at National Hispanic Medical Association, we are forming a structure called a Council of IMGs. We have had IMGs working with at our conferences and presenting posters, and we've realized how important it is to help each other advance your career at whatever level you are. And so I want to thank you for doing that and offering resources and mentorship in your own organization that's called, I'm going to say, Latin Advocate for Latin International Medical Graduates. And so thank you for that. And Dr. Arguelles, we just started the conversation about what are some barriers for recruiting Latinos into clinical trials, but I know you have some slides, and Candace is now going to show your slides so you can tell us more about recruitment, and then Dr. Correa will then talk about retention of the Latino patients.
For the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be here today with you. It's an honor. And yes, I'm advocating a lot for Latin IMGs. I'm a Latin IMG from Mexico. So it's very important for me. When I came to the US, I saw that there were not a lot of Latin physicians for our communities, and I saw the need for more recruitment of medical students here in the US. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I will be talking about clinical research and how, to get more patient recruitment, specifically for our Latino population. It's certainly really difficult to get Latinos to get into clinical trials for diverse, things. Some of those things are that they don't feel they fit on these clinical trials because they don't understand well. If you talk them in English and you cannot, explain them in their own language and culture, how these clinical trials are going to be, they don't really trust you. They don't trust like the process. So it's a challenge to that we are going to discuss today. So Candice, if you can please go to the next. I have been working on clinical research trials, focusing on oncological trials since for 3 years now. And that's the experience I have had. I have recruited a lot of patients. I also work with Tempus Trial Program, which is a company that recruits patients. And if we get a patient, we can open a trial for that specific patient. So I saw that the minority participation of the patients were Latino patients, and there's a need for more diversity, so we can actually see that the results, compare with their population, because Latinos are more than 20% here in the US, and we don't see really a lot of recruitment for Latino patients here. So I'm also going to talk about the future of clinical trials, and at the end of the presentation, I will get some time for some questions if you have. Next, please. So, well, as you may know, the validity of a clinical research trial depends on actually have a large population, but not only a large population, but a population that actually reflects the population that we have in the country. So we need to have enough diversity. And then another important part of it is that the patients that we recruit need to be, compliant with the protocols. If they are not compliant, we cannot know if the results are going to be specific as we expected. Next, please. The problem is that at least 80% of clinical trials fail to meet the deadlines for registration of patients, resulting in the loss of a lot of money every day. So the principal reasons of this is because of contracts negotiations, maybe with the sites, also slow regulatory clearance and by ethic committees and the IRB, and of course, poor recruiting and patient retention. So approximately 20% of researchers fail to include a single patient and 30% below the enrollment in a trial. And this is mainly, I have seen that the most of the researchers don't pre-screen the patient, which is really a really important step that we must, do in case that we want to adhere to the protocols. We also need to fast as much as possible the negotiations with the site. And then for the IRB, we need to have a plan whenever we are going to open a trial. So our patients, on my case, I've been working with oncologic patients. So of course, as you may know, the oncological patients are like priority because they might be stage 3 or 4 patients that they don't have like other options for trials. So in my case, and my side, we do it like as quickly as possible for our patients. Next, please. And then I put this presentation to why doing global research. Well, as you know, we have a lot of competent researchers, but we don't have the funding for those researchers. We have a lot of really clinical minds, researching minds all over the world that don't have the resources to actually do the research. And then we also have a large populations of patients with disease of developed countries, as Mexico, for example, and underdeveloping countries. And they don't have these resources that we have here in the US to do all these clinical trials. And of course, the underrepresented minority of also patients and physicians, because as you may know, the patients normally go with a doctor where they feel comfortable, where they feel understand, where they feel that their culture and everything is being respected. So they trust, they trust everything. Whenever they enter to your room, they are trusting you in the process. If you tell them the clinical trial will be the best option for you, they will trust you if you explain them like how is processed in their own language, in their own culture. So this is really important because, as I said before, we don't have a lot of Latino physicians doing research, and we definitely have a lot of Latino patients that can be included in these clinical trials. Next, please. Well, these are the effects of recruitment for the sponsor. We may have biased statistical results because we don't have a multicultural population that actually represents like the whole population. And also they have decreasing confidence in their researchers because they are not having like people from, they don't have like the specific representation that they need. And for the research side, it's of course a potential of income due to lack of meeting their goals, and then risk of future involvement with sponsor because the sponsor will not invest in the site if they see that they don't have like good recruitment on their patients, and loss in confidence of the patient. If the patient trusts in you and you don't have the way to retain that patient with you and to complete the phase of the clinical trial until the end of treatment and follow-ups and the survival follow-up, it will mean nothing for the sponsor because they won't have like the results they are needing. Next, please. Then I put this, the patient refused to participate for the following reasons. In my experience, the first reason that patients, refuse to participate in a clinical trial is because they don't understand what the clinical trial is about. They just think that the clinical trial, we are going to do something that we have never done, and we are basically like just, doing this for the first time. We have not, it's like their last resort. They don't really understand everything about the clinical trial. They don't have sufficient persons that explain to them specifically what are the consequences, what are the benefits, how long will this take, if the insurance is going to cover some of the CT scans, if they have to pay out of pocket. We need to explain everything to the patients because they don't know what is a phase 1 trial versus a phase 3 trial, for example. So if you say, hey, you are going to be included in this first in human trial, they will think, okay, why am I being included in this phase 1 trial? They don't know. So we need to actually explain to them what are the clinical trials that they have been enrolled, what are the benefits of this clinical trial, the duration of this clinical trial, and also we really need to explain them the schedule of events. Because, for example, for phase 1 trials, we have a lot of PKs. The patients need to be aware that if they enroll in these clinical trials, they need to be, for example, for phase 1, at least 24 hours with PKs, with a lot of blood samples that they need to understand from the beginning. So that will help us to gain their confidence and also for them to feel comfortable with us because they are being listened. They are being like explained in, of course, like the best way to explain them how this works. Another part is that they have the idea that they might get placebo in these trials, that we have like 2 to 1 and we don't know that are blinded trials. The patients might think that they are going to take placebo. So we have to be clear with the patients. We have to be true. We have to tell them the truth. We have to tell them everything about the trial so they can take the best decision for them. And of course, also give them like other options for their disease. this is funny, but they actually think they are going to be treated as a guinea pig. So they will think that they are going to be treated, as I said, like we haven't done this before. So we need to explain that there are a lot of sites around the world. Of course, all the adverse events that have been reported and everything. Another thing is the distance. For this part, we have to talk with the sponsor first, because there are some monetary ways that we can help also our patients that we need to set since the first time that we see the patients. For example, there are some green fires, clean cards that we can say to the patient, okay, you will not be paying anything to come here. We can send a lift for you so you can comply with the study visits, because sometimes it's really difficult for them to get to the clinic just to do these research appointments. And because we have a lot of research appointments, at least for phase 1 patients, they need to go for EKG, then for infusion in the case of oncological patients, PKs and everything. So that's a way that we can help them. And we can also ensure that they are complying with the protocol, because if we send a list for them, there's like no way that they can miss an appointment. So we can get, we don't have deviations. So that's like a win-win for both, for the site, for the sponsor, and also for the patient, because they are not paying out of pocket and they don't have to worry about this. And the cost. Unfortunately, a lot of phase 3 trials don't cover everything. So for example, we have to be honest with patients, explain what will be the cost. As for financial clearance, in the case that they need financial clearance with insurance. If they don't have insurance, maybe see the way if we can find some association that can help them with these studies. But I believe that this is really important, because we have to be honest with them. We have to put like everything on the table for them to take the best decision. But of course, again, I believe that it's really important to have someone that really understands you, that knows your culture, that can explain you, and that have this empathy with you at the time of taking these kind of decisions. Next, please. Well, as I said, we have minority patients. Account for less than 10% of the patients enroll in clinical trials, unfortunately. And recruiting diverse patient populations is really a challenge, especially at the site level. Racial disparities among investigators are often the major reasons why minority patients are underrepresented. However, I have also seen that the patients are not educated on what the clinical trials are. So for me, I believe that it's really important to start educating the patients on what are the clinical trials, that they have other options, that they can look for these clinical trials. They can go to clinicaltrials.gov and see for their disease, and to get more involved and to get used to what's this. And also, I believe that it will be a good way to do it through social media. Since a lot of the patients are involved in social media, I just educate them through social media, telling them what's a phase 1 trial in their, in a way that they can understand it better. So whenever a physician asks them that they might be eligible for a clinical trial, they know at least what are like the advantages and disadvantages of these clinical trials. What does phase 1 means? What does phase 2 means, So it's really important to have that education on our population, for all the population, because also there are a lot of opportunities that they can have on the clinical research part that they may not have with standard of care medications. So I believe that's really important. Next, please. Next. Thank you. So for the future developments, we need to identify potential investigators in the US that works with the minority patient populations. They might be experienced or not experienced, and then develop training programs at the JCP, ICH guidelines. They don't need to be certified. We need to have clinical teams, study coordinators, data coordinators, research assistants, regulatory personnel. Actually, at this Latin IMG's program, I'm trying to get to train these medical doctors so they know how the research is done in the US, so they can help the investigators to recruit more Latino patients because they know our disease. And then we need to prepare all the research sites with the proper infrastructure, of course, to conduct clinical trials. For example, in phase 1 trials, to have at least a room for the patients to stay overnight because they need to stay overnight. So we need to have all that infrastructure so the patient feel confident, they feel understand, they feel comfortable, of course, because they cannot be in a clinic like they need to be there for 24 hours and just in a chair. It's really uncomfortable for them. So we need to have the right infrastructure in the clinic so the patient will like to be recruited for the trial. And then we need to have of course, a proper study personnel qualified. I believe that it's really important to have a really regulatory person, IRB person, because they will keep on track all the PIs. It's really difficult for the PIs because, as a physician, you want the best for the patient and you just see like what's the best for the patient. But we also need to be aware of all the rules that we need to follow in clinical research. And we need to follow all the IRB guidelines, GCP and everything for the best of our patients. So that's really important to have the qualified personnel to do that. Next, please. And well, I believe that increasing regional and global participation to intensify cultural presence will be under development, increase the minority investigator participation, and also increase presence on industry locally, access to trials, which is really important, and the global representation. I believe that if we start really educating our patients on the clinical trials and this great option that we have, and also we start training ourselves as physicians on how to do the proper clinical research. If we start training even medical students on how to do clinical research, I believe that it will be really valuable for our population. Next, please. Well, next, we need to develop more regional networks, CROs, biopharma groups, regulators, and of course, participate in scientific networks, a speaker, exhibit, publication to get to know the work that we need. Next, please. We need to reinforce the communication. We need to recruit minorities, and it's really a complex process, and it not only involves patients, but also involves doctors, the sponsors, and of course the research staff, because once you have the patient, the challenge here is to remain with this patient, to keep the patient in this clinical trial until the end of the clinical trial to actually have the results that you want. And then we need to set time to know fragmentation. Recruit rates can be disappointingly low at this time, just because the patients don't know what are clinical trials, but we need to really reinforce this communication with our patients, with the doctors, and with the research staff. Next, please. Well, I don't know if anyone has any questions for me. I will be happy to answer.
We're going to wait till after Dr. Correa is done to have questions and answers, but let me just remind everyone on the call to please type your questions in the Q&A box. I see that there's one already, but please type more questions, and we're going to now go to Dr. Correa to talk about the retention issues and how best practices for promoting patient retention in clinical trials. Dr. Correa.
Yes, so again, I think I've been introduced before. Thank again, Dr. Rios and the foundation. I want to disclose I work with pharmaceutical companies. I also have my own investigator-initiated clinical trial through the STAT family grant. But again, I don't think anything I'm going to talk about here will be in conflict with the disclosures. So I'm going to start with a case study to prove you why patient or participant retention matters. Then we're going to talk a little bit about patient relationship, experiences and the site environment, patient education support, then give some examples of retention risks and ways to mitigate these risks, and of course close down with a take-home message. So my case study is an example of a clinical trial that was done maybe I think 15. The publication was in 2012. The Atlas study, they were looking at the use of rivaroxaban in patients who had a acute coronary syndrome. And again, this is the main result of the study, showing about a difference of what, maybe 1.5% in the event rate, but the reduction of risk was about 15%. Okay, so initially a positive study, like very, very promising. The next slide. But then when the FDA took a closer look into the trial, they noticed that more than 1,200 subjects actually had discontinued the trial prematurely. Then the company tried to contact the subjects, and they were only able to contact 183 patients. Of those, 177 were alive. So that triggered a lot of discussion. Next slide. So again, in May 23, just one moment, because I cannot read from here. The thing is in my way. Okay, just a moment. Okay, now I can read it. So on May 23, 2012, the missing data plaguing the Atlas trial led the FDA Cardiovascular and Renal Drugs Advisory Committee to vote 6-4 with one abstention against the recommendation of rivaroxaban to reduce the risk of major cardiovascular events in patients who had a acute coronary syndrome. Okay, and this particular person who was in the FDA team at that time made this comment about the study. Okay, so results are not interpretable because 12% of the patients had incomplete follow-up, far higher than the 1 to 1.5% difference in the endpoint between rivaroxaban and placebo. As you can imagine, this is a $1 billion project, all right? And again, because of this criticism to the trial, actually rivaroxaban was not approved for that indication. And again, I used to be a cardiologist in Brazil. Now I'm an endocrinologist. But I was curious, well, was there any other study with rivaroxaban addressing that in that situation? I don't think so, because rivaroxaban sometimes is used, but it's off-label. So I imagine that because of the failure of this trial, the rivaroxaban ended up not getting approval for that particular indication, but again, cardiologists still use it off-label. Next slide. So how can we prevent that? All right. So starting with patient relationship. I think Dr. Arguelles just said that the participation of the principal investigator is very important. Okay, so these teams typically have, the PI, the research nurses, the administrative support people, pharmacy many times. Well, it's a multidisciplinary team, and the PI at the top. The PI is typically the person who has less time to be in touch with the patient. So many times, very important functions are delegated to the research nurses. And again, that can be a killer to the study if the PI keeps him or herself distant from the study participants. So again, part of the formula to success here is to develop a trust with the participant, but not only with that person. We have to conquer the trust from spouse, the family, friends, and many times the primary care provider as well. And basically, establishing this trust means knowing more about the life of this participant. So it's very important to know, what they do for a living, what their living conditions. Again, know how these people live, so that you can promote engagement all the time. So another thing that's important, and that I can't stress enough as well, is to have a stable clinical staff dealing with a particular participant. Okay, the participant should know who they can contact in case of any kind of problems. All right, and that person should be the person. Now, I would say that having this person, and again, in my clinical trials, I do have a nurse who keeps track of this with these patients. They make that connection that needs to be, continuous and present in case even of events that happen outside the clinical trial, like a serious adverse event, hospitalizations. So as we'll see later, it's very important for the research team to give support to that particular participant in events that are outside of the trial. And that's why having that person in particular, a person who knows that particular participant, is very important. And of course, in those more extreme cases of hospitalization, serious adverse events, that's when also the PI should be present. The PI should also contact the patient. Maybe it's not the very first person to contact the patient, but the PI must be present, not only shadowing the nurse. Okay, so I think this is a very important dynamic to be understood, so that we can have successful clinical trials. So, and successful retention. So again, listen to the patients, of course, is important, and resolving problems and concerns. Next. So the patient experience at the site is very important. So we need to understand, how this patient is coming to the site. Very simple things like parking. You don't want your patients to be, paying parking in an academic hostel like my situation here, where parking is expensive. So that should be planned ahead of time. That should be something available to the patient, some parking passes. Check-in should be, efficient, expedite. The waiting time, of course, you don't want. So I work now in in an area of the hostel where they concentrate clinical trials, something called clinical research unit. And again, this is separate from our administrative area. You don't want your nurse or your PI or whoever is dealing with the patient to, keep the patient waiting for like 30 minutes, 1 hour to have the visit. Special needs for special populations, depending on what you do in terms of clinical trials. You could be doing trials with people who have dementia, for instance. So with some difficulties in participation, so you should address that. Of course, working around the schedule of the patient is very important. We talked about transportation already. Consider holidays and vacations when you plan your visits with the patient. And again, it's not only for the participant. You also have to consider the plans of the site staff, of your research nurse. You don't want the staff to be upset with you as a PI because you're not being considerate in scheduling those visits for your research trial participants. Seasonal relocation, for instance, is very common here in Iowa. So lots of participants, they might actually go south for winter. So they go to Arizona, they'll go to Florida. So you have to be prepared to deal with the situation. Inclement weather as well. Iowa, minus 20 sometimes. Very freezing place, I would say. And you have to account for those, weather situations. So again, be prepared. Try to think ahead and have a plan to ensure continuation of participation of this patient. Again, I think the visits should be efficient, but never try to rush this patient. So allocate enough time for the encounter, and always thank your patients, your participants, for being in this study. So I think this is also very important. I always thank them every time. If I see them like 10 times, I will thank them for doing this huge contribution to science. Next slide. So this was also mentioned before. Patient education is tremendously important. So they must understand what is in the informed consent, okay, in detail. So we have to go through those consent forms, and we need to make sure they understand. We need to give them time to ask questions and maybe prompt some questions for the participants. This is particular troublesome among Latinos, because many times there is a language barrier, so we should be prepared to go through this process in their, in case probably Spanish, in Spanish, so that people clearly understand, using, sometimes some clinical trials, they have a shorter form of informed consent sometimes is helpful. Going through a 20-page informed consent can sometimes be very confusing for the participants. So sometimes having the highlights, of course, it does not replace the informed consent, the full length, but it can facilitate the process. Many times, if we have approval from the IRB, we actually send the informed consents beforehand to the patients, to the participants or prospective participants, so that they can have time to read through the document. And again, a Spanish version of the document would be important. They have to understand what the medication, what the intervention is about. In case of medication, they have to understand the dosing and potential adverse effects. They have to understand, what's the structure of the encounter, if there's going to be, vital taking, it's going to be some sort of measurement, if it's going to be a blood draw, how much blood we're going to take from that patient, from that person, and how long it's going to last. So very important information to share with the participant. And another thing, we have always to ask if, after all this explanation, you have to ask the participant or the potential participant whether they can truly adhere to the intervention. Okay, and again, if you end up having someone enrolled your study, you have to continue asking these questions. All right, so you have to remember, many times the clinical trials I do, they are like 5 years long. So it's a long-term relationship, and in 5 years, a lot of things happen, change in life. So which may compromise the capacity of that participant to be in the study. So we have to understand that, and we have to plan ahead to have a plan, because this can be, you can facilitate, which might not be obvious to the participants. You might have a plan that will ensure the continuation of that participant in the study. So again, I think understanding the obstacles has to do what I've just mentioned.
Dr. Correa, Correa, I apologize, but we got a late start. I'm going to have to stop you at this slide so that we can answer a couple questions.
Sure.
I think, and I know that a few of the other slides we can send to everyone, the total slides, but you gave us a lot of information, and people are interested in learning about how they can get trained like you did and like Dr. Arguelles did. Are there any training programs that you know of, either one of you, that really teach how to recruit Latino patients and how to retain Latino patients? And one of the questions was, even though there are doctors out there in clinical trial land who speak Spanish, that's not enough to be able to recruit patients. Do you know of any research training right now that has helped to better train not only doctors, but clinical researchers how to reach Latino patients? Either one of you?
Well, I haven't actually know any training for specifically Latino patients, for recruiting Latino patients. However, I believe it will be a great opportunity to have one of those trainings, because it's not just to translate the words for our patients, it's to
Right.
actually understand them and to translate the communication and to intend the same, not just translating words, just to let them know what the trial is about. The
Right.
thing is that, for example, what we can do is to ask the sponsors for flyers in Spanish. That's something that they can provide us if we ask. So I believe there's a way that we can do that.
Resources, yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Correa, do you know of any specific training for Latino recruitment of patients?
I think that's a good idea. For
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
for us, right?
We're
That's
gonna
why
have
we're
to-
here.
We're gonna have to
We
develop that.
that.
Yeah.
I don't think there is, and again, I don't think people get trained on this on formal courses. Actually, I think that would be helpful. But at least in academia, it's basically, the people who are doing this actually train the next generation. That's what happened with me.
It's a profession.
So,
Yes, yes. There's another question I think is important. Some of the doctors on the call want to know, how do we get more patients to learn about clinical trials? How do we introduce people to clinical trials if you're not in a clinical trial? What do you do what do you do at MD Anderson? What do you do at University of Iowa to let patients know about clinical trials?
Well, in the case of MD Anderson, we have a lot of different clinical trials on different specialties. So whenever we have a patient that they don't have other standard of care treatments available, we get to see the pool of actual clinical trials that we have on the site. And we reach out to the principal investigators that are in charge of that clinical trial. We do a pre-screening. And also there's a case of, Tempus trial program. So this genetic, the genetic testing for the patients actually can tell us which genetic factor is wrong. So we can do target therapy, and we can, in the reports that they gave us for Tempus, they list a list of clinical trials that the patient might be eligible, and we can just see it on clinicaltrials.gov. So if we don't have like any other resources for the patient, maybe we can tell them that he can take a look at clinicaltrials.gov to see if there's any specific trial for their disease.
So that's important, the clinicaltrials.com. Clinicaltrials.com.
That's
right.
I mean, that helps with,
and that's a national database. I think NIH runs that database.
Yes, correct.
There's another question, just Dr. Correa, and then we're going to have to wrap up here. Have you done anything about the importance of health literacy on the topic of clinical trials? Just letting other researchers know how to talk about clinical trials in a very simple way, so more people, not just Latinos, but more people can understand the concepts behind the different clinical trial principles.
Again, in an academic setting, among us, it does not tend to be a big issue, but that's something we always stress with fellows, with residents, teaching them the basics. In terms of the broader population, again, definitely, and again, you don't typically, you don't do a course of clinical trials for the general population, but you have to teach the person who's coming to participate in the trial what the trial is, the concept of comparing one intervention with another intervention. Sometimes you have placebo involved. So they have to understand that they might not necessarily benefit from a study from a personal standpoint. that there is importance for like to stay in the study, so that there is like some conclusion, so that we can have a conclusion. So this is a very important part, the education of the patient at the participation site, what the clinical trial is, so that they can stay in the trial. Because if they volunteer to begin with to be part of it, again, they should understand that if they quit this trial, there's going to be a consequence, not necessarily to them, but to the entire enterprise.
Right. And
again, I think that's important.
That's beautiful. The one last question, and Dr. Arguelles, let me ask you, it was asked, besides language, what is another major challenge of reaching and convincing Latino patients that it is important to join clinical trials? Is it religion? Is it myths? Is it just their own fear? What is it that you think besides language?
Well, in my experience, and I will tell it like familiarism, because of our Latino patients, they come like in family, and the decisions are taken like in family. So
so it's a decision making in the family.
Yeah, say that, oh no.
But what is the barrier? What is the major problem?
I believe that that's one of the barriers, that the patients bring all their family to get these decisions, and then
so they can't make the decision themselves.
The mistrust in research institute, another barrier. Yeah, for example, for patients that have some traditional beliefs. So that's another one of the barriers. Other patients have just fear of deportation. So they believe that if they enroll in one of these clinical trials, they will be exposed and they might be deported. So that's something that I have faced actually on the clinic. So I don't know.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much. You have lots of experience. It's obvious. And, every one of our webinars has Latino experience that nobody else has, because you are Latinos. Even Brazil is Latino.
Oh, we are Latino.
Yes.
And unfortunately, not Hispanic.
We welcome your expertise that you are sharing with our audience. And we invite everybody to keep joining us for our next webinar that will be in January. And Candace, if you want to put up a last slide, I think there's a slide about future events. And well, you've got like 4 slides there, but anyway, we are having a post-webinar study survey that we will submit to everyone that was on here. Our next clinical webinar for clinical research is January 24. Again, we will be talking about the successes and the strategies for clinical trials in our communities. And we have a scholarship program where we are looking for sponsors and also participants in our galas in Los Angeles, November 17, and in Manhattan, New York, November 30th, and receptions in Chicago, November 29, and Washington, D.C. might be around the same time, and San Antonio will be in February 20th. And I think there's one other important announcement, and that is that we have the All of Us research, and also our 30th anniversary of NHMA, National Hispanic Medical Association, and the National Hispanic Health Foundation. I think somebody forgot NHHF there on the title. They'll have to change that. But it is April 12 and 13 in Washington, D.C. at the Hyatt Regency. If you can let everybody join us who is interested, we are very much going to ask the participants to help us develop the next 5-year action plan on what we should be prioritizing, like clinical trials, for our community. And our community are Latino health professionals, doctors, nurses, dentists, pharmacists, who we need to train to help them get more involved in research and other activities. So I'm just going to go ahead and close and thank you again to Candace and Viviana and Guillermo, our staff, Yvonne Rodriguez, who's helping us also with identifying speakers. And thank you both, Dr. Correa from Iowa and Dr. Arguelles from MD Anderson.
And Dr. Rios, thank you very much again. There are probably questions in the chat. I think both myself and Dr. Arguelles would be pleased to kind of respond if we have the the questions and maybe the email that the person has.
Oh no, we'd be happy to send you questions.
Absolutely.
I think you answered most of them. Oh, actually, you answered all of them.
Okay.
Well, we'd be happy to have you back again another time.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rios, and it was a pleasure to be
Have
Thank
a
you.
great night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, be free to reach out to me if you have any further questions.
Yes, and all of these our recordings are on our website, nhmafoundation.org, and also a YouTube channel that we have. Thank you very much. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Good night.